We're working on our sermon series called Stories, where we walk through the Old Testament stories and see if we can find our own story in the stories of those who have gone before us. Today, I want to tell the story of a character that I think in Sunday school is often portrayed as a desirable character, someone you want to be like, because they match some of the qualities that we so often want: strength, good looks, ability to attract the opposite sex. And yet, if we dig into the story and the understanding of how Israel saw this person, it's quite possible that this was a tragic character in many ways. And so I want to dig into the tragedy of Samson today. Samson has an interesting announcement story. His birth is announced to his parents, which puts him in good biblical company. We have an expectation from the very first moment we hear of him that something special is going to happen in Samson. He joins the biblical host of Isaac, who was announced to Abraham, John the Baptist, who was announced to Zechariah and Elizabeth, and Jesus Christ himself, who was announced to Mary and Joseph. When we have an announcement story, an angel who comes to a mother and says that God is doing something special in this child, our ears should perk up and we should be prepared for something special. And so Samson is announced to his parents, and his parents are told that he is to be treated from the time he is born as a Nazirite. A Nazirite. Now that's a strange word, right? We learn about what a Nazirite is in the book of Numbers. And the Nazirite vow, which anyone can take, is usually taken for a short period in one's life. A period or a time where one consecrates themselves fully to God by eliminating a few acts from their life. We're told that this Nazirite vow is to separate themselves to Jehovah. And so if you're going to take the Nazirite vow, for this period of your life, you're going to take no wine or strong drink, no grape products whatsoever, no razor on your head so that your hair grows, and that you come in contact with no dead bodies, even animals or family. So this is the Nazirite vow. Samson is going to stand out because he is going to take the Nazirite vow by way of his parents from his birth on. His whole life is to be separated to Jehovah, to Yahweh, to God, and God alone. And so he is born into this vow, and he takes it on and is supposed to live into it. But we find that Samson disappoints very quickly. In fact, the first story after his birth we're going to read today, from Judges chapter 14, 1 through 11, we're going to introduce ourselves to Samson and find that he almost immediately in his story begins to come into conflict with this vow that he's supposed to live under. Would you join me in standing as we read the word of the Lord this morning? Judges chapter 14, verses 1 through 11. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among your people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. For at that time they were ruling over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Sometime later, he went back to marry her. He turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. In it, there was a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they ate it too. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now, the father went down to see the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as was customary for the bridegrooms. When he appeared, he was given 30 companions. The word of the Lord. Thank you. Amen. You may be seated. Like I said, Samson is quickly disappointing. And we have hints throughout the text here that what is happening with Samson is inappropriate per his Nazirite vow. First, the very first verb that we're given is that Samson went down. Now, when this happens in biblical text, it's by no accident. So we're not looking here at some sort of description of him going south. He is in descent immediately. The text will often talk about heading to a holy place as going up, and as heading to a place that could get you in trouble as heading down. If you were to read the New Testament, Jesus and his disciples always go up to Jerusalem. That's always the language that's used. They went up to Jerusalem. Here we're told Samson went down. We're supposed to understand this as unraveling language, as descent language, as struggle language. And we see what his struggle is immediately. He falls in love with a foreign woman. And his parents are struggling with this, but God seems to allow it because God wants to confront the Philistines who are causing trouble to his people. And so we see he's in decline not only because of this woman, but even the language that he uses. He uses this language, she is the right one for me. That's how we translate it in the text. She is the right one for me. But literally, if you saw the Hebrew text, it says, she was right in my own eyes. She was right in my own eyes. Now, that doesn't seem like a huge distinction, really, in our English language, but let me tell you why it matters. The very end of the book of Judges, which we just read from, says that the people of Israel are in chaos and are, quote, doing whatever is right in their own eyes. And so Samson here is doing whatever is right in his own eyes as the leader of Israel, and he's creating a pattern of behavior in those people who are supposed to be following him. And the people respond. They too do whatever is right in their own eyes. The book of Judges is just a fascinating book in the Old Testament because there's a particular cycle among the people of Israel that repeats itself over and over and over. And I've got a bit of a graphic for you here to check out to see. You see, there were 6 judges in the book of Judges, all who are appointed by God to lead over the people of Israel. And each of them followed the exact same pattern as the one before. We find that Israel rebels against God, that God gets angry, that Israel is oppressed by a foreign nation. Following that, Israel repents under the leadership of a judge. God raises up a judge to help Israel. There's then peace. That judge dies, and then Israel rebels against God and start the cycle over again. In each of the story of each of the 6 judges, this exact cycle takes place. There is an oppression by a foreign government, a rebellion, a raising of a judge that leads to peace, and then when the judge dies, they return to their rebellion. We're told at the very end of Judges that the people of Israel continue into this, and they descend into further chaos because they continue to do what is right in their own eyes. And Samson leads the way. In fact, he's the final judge in the book of Judges. And we lead into a period of chaos following this that leads to eventually Saul becoming the king of Israel, followed by David. This is about the history that we're in here. And Samson, again, teaches them to do whatever is right in their own eyes. And it's not just with this woman. We're told that as he heads down into Timnah, he heads straight to the vineyards to find this woman. Does that ring off any alarm bells to you? He's not supposed to be near grapes. He's not supposed to have strong drink. His Nazirite vow is such that he doesn't belong anywhere near a vineyard. And yet, just brazenly, he walks right towards the place that he doesn't belong. And when he's there, he's confronted by a lion. And what does he do with the lion? He kills it with his bare hands. So now, with his bare hands, surrounded by grapes, He's touching a dead body. Alarm bells. These are all things that he, as a Nazirite, is not supposed to be doing. And we know, because we're given box seats in the text, to know that his power and his strength comes from a God who is descended in spirit upon him and is seen and fulfilled in these vows that he has taken. And just casually and brazenly, Samson is breaking his vows left and right. From there, he goes back and he grabs his parents and he heads off to the wedding where he's going to marry this woman. And he heads back down to Timnah for his wedding, and he goes to check on that old lion. And when he sees the lion carcass there, he notices that bees have made its way into the cavity of this dead lion and have begun to create honey in there. And so Samson, hungry apparently, reaches his hand into the dead lion, scoops up some honey, and just eats it. And he enjoys it so much that he grabs some more and brings it to his parents and doesn't tell them where he acquired this honey from. This is like a 3-year-old child behavior, right? Here, mommy, eat this. And they eat it and they enjoy it. So Samson breaks his command once more, grabbing from a dead body, breaking his vows once more. And he heads off to a party where 30 men are chosen to be his groomsmen. And in this time, a party around a wedding was known to be a bash. People spent a month together drinking and just losing control of themselves. And so Samson once again enters into an alcoholic beer bash of a party around his wedding. Once again, where he doesn't belong. He's brazenly pushing against his vows that he has with God, surrounding himself with strong drink, touching dead bodies. And he's just filled with confidence in himself because he's strong and he's good looking and desirable and he's charismatic. And people will follow him because these are the kind of leaders that we're attracted to. And Samson, at a certain point it seems, transitions from understanding himself to be strong and charismatic and good looking because God has given him this ability and has asked for little from him in return. And he seems to have transitioned to believing that it's himself. He himself is the one who is strong. He himself is the one who is charismatic. And so he carries on doing whatever he pleases. And so with these 30 men that he's given to be his party, he pulls them in and says, I want to make a bet with you. I have a riddle. You have 7 days of this little alcoholic soiree that we have to figure out the riddle. If you do, each of you will bring me a garment of the finest linen you can find. But if you can figure out my riddle, I will give you 30 pieces of garment. Is that a deal? And they said, well, 7 days, surely we could figure this out. Tell us what the riddle is. And Samson says this, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, he's now divulging what he's done with the lion, reaching in and grabbing the honey. But no one knows what he's done. He's not told anyone, not even his parents. So these men who have made this deal with him, who now have big bucks on the line, get angry because they have no idea what he's talking about. With no context that he's killed a lion and reached in and grabbed honey from it, this doesn't make any sense. And so after a few days of trying to sort out what the riddle is, they finally get so frustrated that they go to his new wife and say, listen, get him to tell you what the riddle is. And so she throws herself at him. Please tell me. Do you know how much it hurts me that you won't even tell me what the secret is? And Samson knows that there's a clock, so he says no. And he says no. And he says no until I will never understand this in Samson. At the last minute, on the last day, he finally tells her what the secret is. And she immediately goes and tells all the guys. And all the guys come in and they tell him what it is. Surely the strong, the eater, is a lion, and the sweetness is honey. And Samson is furious. He says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, that is quite an image. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And so he goes and he finds 30 men who have expensive clothes, and he kills them all and takes their clothes and pays off his debt. If that wasn't enough, people in the Philistine camp get angrier and angrier with him. When Samson goes to do this business of killing the 30 men, the father sees that the groom is no longer at the party, so assumes that he has divorced her daughter. And so he takes his daughter and gives her to another man, and the wedding happens elsewhere. And Samson returns, ready to find his wife, and he's told, you can't go in there, she's with another man. Huh? And the father says, oh, I'm sorry, Samson, we've made a mistake. Would you like my other daughter? This is a strange foreign world to me. Would you like my other daughter? And Samson says, no, that's my wife. And so Samson gets angry. And when Samson gets angry, destruction is sure to follow. And so he goes and he collects foxes. This is an elaborate plan. This is another plan that I'm just like, what kind of brain comes up with this? He goes and he grabs foxes and he ties their tails together. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to wrestle one fox. Samson gathers enough foxes together that he can tie multiple of them together. This is wild. And then he sticks a torch inside of his knot on each of these foxes and just turns them loose in the crops of the Philistines. This is some severe revenge. And the crops of the Philistines, they burn and they come down. And Samson is pleased with himself, but the Philistines now want war. So they begin to chase him around until they find him. And Samson responds to them by grabbing a donkey's jawbone. Now, pause. You ever held a donkey's jawbone before? No, me neither. Do you suspect you can grab a live donkey's jawbone? He's touching more dead stuff. He's touching more dead stuff. And yet, we're told the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him again, and he takes his donkey jawbone and strikes down 1,000 men. What's amazing to me is Samson continually breaks his vow with God, and yet the Spirit of the Lord continues to be present with him. Now, this is good news for us, because I suspect for as many people as there are in this room, there are people who have broken their vows with God. And yet the Spirit of the Lord is faithful to Samson. It continues to come upon him and protect him and help him in his task of confronting the Philistines. His breaking of his vows isn't severe enough that God descends on him and leaves him on his own. God continues to go with him because he is the raised judge for the people of Israel. Our mistakes aren't enough for the Spirit of the Lord to give up on us. And that's good news. That is good news. But Samson continues to descend into his toil. He continues to make mistake upon mistake, because after this, he returns, he goes south once more to Gaza, and he finds for himself yet another woman that he loves, but not after he stops to meet with a prostitute first. Samson is losing control. And he meets this woman that he falls in love with, which is different language that is used before. This woman's name is Delilah. And he meets Delilah and loves her and wants to be with her. And so now he has fully triggered the Philistines, and they are out to get him. They will not have enough of him until they find him dead. But Samson is in love and wants to be with Delilah. So he takes her in, and they get together, and immediately the Philistines get to Delilah, their own daughter from their tribe. And they say, we will pay you handsomely if you hand Samson over to us. I've always wondered what Delilah's deal is here. It's possible that she just wants to get wealthy, and that this is an offer that's too good to say no to. But there's a part of me also that wonders, these biblical texts happen so fast when we read them, but we're told right before here that Samson was in charge for 20 years. He was a judge for 20 years confronting the Philistines. 20 years he was in charge of Israel. And there's a part of me that wonders, in that just quick little naming of 20 years, that Delilah, I wonder if she was a small child when those foxes ran through the fields of the Philistines. I wonder when she meets Samson that she doesn't return the love to Samson, but recognizes him as the enemy. I wonder if she's a mole from the beginning, hurting from the destruction of her family's property as a child. I wonder. I don't have any proof for this. I just wonder if that 20-year gap is a hint for us that she remembers and knew. And so when she's offered money, turning him over is the full thirst of her revenge. And so Delilah, now you'll recall again, our story started with another woman who sold Samson out. I really don't know when Samson's going to get the hint, because here Delilah comes to him and says, "Tell me what the source of your strength is, honey." And Samson says, "Oh, well, it's pretty simple, really. If you took 7 bowstrings that have not been dried and tie them in my hair, then I'll or tie my arms behind, then I'll surely be bound." And so Delilah does just this, ties him up, and comes in the room and says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And he breaks free immediately and is ready for a fight. Now, I don't really know how your relationship works, but if my wife tied me up and invited my enemies into my house to kill me, that may be pretty close to the end of our relationship. Samson laughs it off. Delilah comes back and asks again, "Oh, you've hurt my feelings. How could I possibly love you if I don't know the source of your strength?" And Samson says, "Oh, well, new ropes. If I were tied up, that would get me." So he goes to sleep, and she gets new ropes and ties him up and says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And Samson breaks it and is ready for a fight. And Delilah once again, is frustrated. "How could I possibly love you if you don't tell me the truth about where your strength comes from?" Samson goes in for a third time. What would your advice be, Counselor Norm, at this point? He says, "Well, if you weave my 7 braids of my hair into the fabric of a loom and tighten it with a pin, then I would lose my strength." This is pretty elaborate. Weaving 7 braids into fabric on a loom and tightening it with a pin? That takes some skill. And so Delilah does this. And once again, she says, "The Philistines are upon you." And Samson gets up and breaks loose and breaks free and is ready to fight again. Now, at this point, it's probably just time for Samson to think, this is probably not the woman for me. But she whines just a little cuter. And he tells her the truth. He says that he had taken a Nazirite vow and that his hair had never been touched with a razor. And that if it were touched with a razor, if it were cut, he would lose all of his strength. Now, this is only a part of the story, right? His strength comes from God. And he has ruined his Nazirite vow in almost every way save his hair, with almost every part of his life. This is the very last string or thread of his vow that he has not given up on. The rest of it he's treated very casually with his entire life, and God has continued to remain faithful. But this last piece of his hair, he tells Delilah, and he goes to sleep, and predictably, she cuts his hair while he sleeps and says, "The Philistines are upon you." And they come in, and he's strengthless. And they take him, and they make him a prisoner. And not only do they make him a prisoner, but to make sure he can't recover from this, they gouge his eyes out and turn him into the nation's dummy. And so one day, the powerful of the Philistines are together and they're drinking and having a party. And we're told right when they get to the point of just supreme drunkenness, they begin to scream and call for Samson. Bring him out to us that he would dance. And so they bring the once powerful and mighty Samson out before them, now eyeless, can't see anything. And they make him dance. They're humiliating him. And Samson asks for one last thing. Since I can't see, will you at least bring me to the posts so that I can know where I am? And they grant him that. And as he's dancing, he prays to God. This I think is an important turn in the text. Samson understands the blessings that God has put on him as his birthright. He treats it brazenly. He's full of himself. He thinks his strength is of his own accord. He lives just wildly with all of the gifts and goodness that God has given him. And now, when he's strengthless and eyeless, he's recorded as praying. When he's strong, he doesn't seem to need God's help. But when he's weak, we finally have a recorded prayer from his mouth. And so in his weakness, he finally turns to God. And he says, if you could just let my strength return for this one moment, I will take all of these Philistines out. And God hears his prayer. And Solomon uses those posts that he has, that he's touching, and he pushes. And God fills him one last time. And the building comes tumbling down. And we're told that Samson, who on a kamikaze mission, takes his own life with his last action. But that he kills more Philistines in this one action than he did with his entire life. This is a story of descent. If Samson had received all of the blessings and all of the strength and all that God had given him with his whole life, it would never have turned to this. Samson would have led well. God would have blessed them in all that they did, but Samson so often made it about him and not about God. This story didn't have to end with the kamikaze mission. It could have ended much better, but the story was about Samson over and over and over, when the story was supposed to be about God and God's people. But Samson made it about him, and it led to his death. And he fulfilled the mission that God gave him, but only through his own self-destruction. God has a way of doing what God will do. God invites us to partner with God's mission for the world. I don't think God gets any joy in seeing his people self-destruct. There's a story I read this week, fascinating story, about the West Coast. In particular, there's been a harvesting of these kind of fish. Tell me if you know what these fish are. Have you seen these before? What? No. I'll give you another hint. Show this next picture. Sardines, they're anchovies technically, yes, anchovies. But so they've been so heavily harvested on the West Coast that whales don't have a place to eat them. This is a fish that whales love to eat. And so recently, within the last decade, there was found to be 300 whales that turned up on a Pacific beach with no explanation. They were all beached, and it was right around Monterey. Just beached, 300 of them. And scientists had no idea why it was that these whales were beached. And so they did their best to help them, but they all died. And so the scientists try to figure out what in the world leads to 300 whales turning up on the beach and self-destructing. And the answer was, in Monterey Bay, suddenly there was a spike in anchovy population. And so these whales, which were doing their normal migration north, got a little bit of a whiff in the water that those anchovies that they love, that humans have been, for some weird reason, putting on their pizzas, that they had spiked on their route up north. And so the whales were going in a direction that they belonged, but veered off to grab some of those anchovies. And they started chasing those anchovies until finally they ran out of water and ran into the beach and couldn't get back into the water. Now, how in the world does an anchovy kill a whale? That's a crazy story. And yet, I wonder if this story is a metaphor for so many of our lives, just like it is Samson. We have a direction that we're called, a direction that we belong to be going into, and yet the smallest of distractions can derail us to our own death. Samson was called to lead Israel, and he was given every gift and ability that he could possibly have. But every distraction that came along its way, Samson indulged in. And it ultimately led to his death and a continuation of the cycle of Israel that they were caught in. That cycle was sin, of course. I wonder how many of us in this room today know that God is calling us into the direction of his glory, in his salvation, in his hope, in his fulfillment, and yet we get caught by every little anchovy distraction that comes along our way, veering off the path, chasing the littlest things of this world. I hope that the story of Samson will help you see that that is a road to destruction. Chasing every little distraction, the opposite sex, filling ourselves with the thing of this world, chasing after power, thinking that we do things on our own strength and that God has nothing to do with it. Chasing these distractions lead to death. Today, I want to invite you to find yourself back on the path that God has given you. To recognize that what you have and what you've been given are gifts of God in order to prop you up to fill the role that God has given you. Some of you today haven't even made that first step, are so busy chasing the distractions of this world, you don't even recognize where God is calling you to. Others of you know where God is calling you to and are running like crazy. Today, in light of the story, the tragedy of Samson, I invite you to hear the story that God is painting in your life again and follow him. God is trying to lead you to life. And if you're not following him, you're chasing anchovies towards death. And what a tragedy that is. So today, as this band sings this final song, if you've not made your first declaration for Christ, or if you've made a declaration for Christ and you're chasing the distractions of this world, don't leave today without committing yourself to Christ, because he is the one who leads to life. He is the one who leads you away from destruction. He is the one who gives you hope. He is the one who gives you purpose. He is the one who's given you all of the good gifts you have in life. Give your life to Christ. Don't chase what this world has to offer. If you'd like to pray, if you'd like to come and seek that God would put you back on his path. Because the path of chasing anchovies leads to death. And the path to Christ leads to life. Choose life. Let's sing this song. The altar is open if you'd like to come and pray.